Welcome to The Fix,
the new way to get your copy reviewed by two former copy chiefs.
because whether you're an aspiring copywriter or you've been in the industry for decades,
The best way to improve your work isn't to read books, blog posts, or online guides.
it's to see real writing, your writing, being reviewed and improved in front of your eyes.
And that's the goal of The Fix, to bring you inside a virtual writer's room
And watch along as we review, edit and rewrite real copy.
from real writers like you. So let's get straight into this week's episode. And remember, if you like what you see here,
Please share The Fix with anyone you think would find it valuable. It is completely free.
hello and welcome to this episode of The Fix, where we are going to be talking about hooks. Not the common or garden hooks that you'll find your hanging baskets hanging from, but the idea of hooking a reader in and how we do that. This all came about, recently we did a special kind of copywriting training week for a company that Nick still works for. On and off, and we basically took on a load of copywriters and kind of trained them and tried and identify which one the company could employ. And Nick came along with the idea of trying to separate what was an idea versus a hook in terms of a sales letter, and that idea in itself caused a little bit of consternation. People would try, well, is this an idea or is this a hook? And it took a little while for everybody to get, but as we evolved through the week and started talking about more in these using this language, it became very clear that it was actually very useful to separate the difference between a hook and idea. So that's where we're going to go. If it sounds a bit abstract, hopefully it will come more clear during the episode. If it doesn't, we'll give you an address to email us at the end to complain. But perhaps if we can start, Nick, by explaining in your mind the harrowed place that it is, what is a hook and what is an idea?
Well, perhaps we should start even further back than that, because, okay, so
Dinosaurs were roaming the earth.
Eons and eons ago. No, so I think the idea, the requirement of a sales letter to have a hook is quite a niche thing. So it emerges from the fact that a lot of the sales letters or webinars or whatever it is that we work on are very, very long.
Yep.
So we came from that tradition of writing a sales piece which would be between 5,000 and 10,000 words. And often the longer it was, the better it worked.
Yep.
And that's not true of all advertising, and it's not true of all copywriting.
Yep.
But the requirement of holding somebody's attention for 10,000 words, or let's say an hour of their time, right? Let's just use that as about the ballpark figure. We need to have something going on in our copy that holds the reader's attention and that keeps them hooked in, wanting to find out more, wanting to stick with us, to drag them into the world, the imaginative space that our sales letter occupies.
Yep.
I don't mean that in a cynical way, but you don't need that if you're writing a 30-second spot, because you just don't have the time. It's over before the reader or the viewer even knows what's going on. So I think it's particular to a certain sort of copy.
Yeah, I without trying to throw a spanner in the works too early, I actually think even in a short image ad or a magazine ad or an indirect piece of marketing, maybe an advert, a 30-second. I actually think as we define this, you will find that there is an idea and then there is the hook. I do think you'll find that in everything.
And we'll come to sort of clickbait and stuff like that later on in the episode. So that's the first point I'd make, which is I think it's relatively particular, or it emerges from the requirement to draw the reader into a space that is going to, it's going to take up a long period of time relative to all other advertising, and therefore we need to think more carefully about the techniques that we're using. Right, that's the first part. Second thing is, how would I define what a hook is? Well, I'd actually start by thinking about non-advertising. So the way I first came to it was through reading Made to Stick, which we've mentioned before, as a book by two guys called Chip and Dan Heath. They talk about the concept of an open loop in that. And I would say an open loop is effectively what we're talking about here. Now, an open loop works by virtue of the fact that your mind, the human mind, sort of abhors a vacuum. Mm-hmm. So an open loop is like in a whodunit, a novel or a murder mystery or whatever. It's who did it? I have to find out who did it now. Yep. And how often do you find yourself, this is probably not true of you because of course you're a very highfalutin reader, but if you're reading a sort of crappy paperback novel on the beach or whatever, it might be rubbish, but if it's a murder mystery, it's kind of hard to put it down halfway through because you kind of think, if you're watching murder mystery, Midsummer Murders or something,
I would say the entire Marvel film franchise works on that idea that you just go to watch more because you just want to see what's happening.
You are hooked. Yeah. You may not think that it's a fantastic piece of work. Mm-hmm. It may not change your life, but there's something about that form of who did it, who did the murder, how did that work, or how did they get away with it, whatever the question is. That's an open loop. And this all works under the logic of your mind needs that loop to be closed. Mm-hmm. It's going to nag away at you. You want to know what's round the corner. Yep. You want to know what's in the black box. You want to know who did it. How did they get out of the room? How did they get the body into the room? Whatever the mystery is, it's an open loop. Now, I think it's actually useful to keep thinking about, say, a whodunit. Say a novel or whatever. Because I actually think if you start to break it down like that, you might say, well, what's the novel about? Well, it might be about 12 people on the Orient Express going from X to Y. That's what the novel is about. Yep. That's the sort of narrative. That's the story. Yep. The hook is who did it. Yep. And the reason I use that example is I'm starting to try and get a wedge between what the whole thing is about and what the hook is. Yep. I think they are two different things. And if we move that then into the realm of advertising, I think what your idea is, your big idea, isn't necessarily what your hook is. Yep. But the two things might work in conjunction with one another. And I know that that's where we got into a lot of confusion, didn't it? Because it was kind of like, well, these were people who were still trying to figure out what copy was.
And I think a lot of people come with you in the copywriting world and will come, right, okay, we've got to sell X. And I'll come and say, okay, here's my headline, here's my idea. And it's like, no, they're not the same thing. If that initial headline that you might write isn't necessarily that's an expression of an idea. A hook is it's not an expression necessarily, it can be different things, but that is just one small element of it. The idea is a much bigger amorphous thing that's moving and evolving, and it's much harder to hold on to because it's necessarily a bigger thing. So when we talk about the big idea and what all this, but as a copywriter, it helps to be able to separate these, because when you are then in a situation where you're pitching your idea, you're pitching your headlines and your expression of this idea, you'll go, oh, it's this, and you go, your feedback is often, well, that doesn't get me. And you go, yeah, but it's this idea, it's really good. And it's like, yeah, the idea is really good, but you're not expressing it. You haven't hooked me into that idea in the right way.
Yeah, so actually, this is at the risk of it becoming even more complicated. I actually think there's always three things going on, okay? So I think you have your idea, you have your expression, how that is expressed in the headline and the lead of your sales piece, and then you have your hook. Okay, so let me give you an example, right? Your idea, and I'm just going to express that just as the prosaic way that you would tell somebody else, not necessarily your customer. So it might be, moving abroad will give you a much greater standard of living and happier retirement. Yep. That might be your idea. Ultimately, that's what I want to sell people on that. Now, that's not a headline, is it? We can't express that, but that's what our idea is. We're going to show you that moving to Central America or Southern France or wherever it might be will give you a higher standard of living, happier lifestyle, better retirement, right? That's our idea. So we know that's what we're trying to do. How do we then express that? Okay, I'm going to deconstruct a sales letter that already exists. We might use a story expression, a story lead that puts you on the spot. Imagine your life was like this.
Yep.
You do this, you do that, hibiscus, hollyhocks, all that sort of stuff. That's an in-joke. If you don't get that, that's fine. So my idea, prosaically, is this, that you can have this great life abroad. I'm not going to just come out and say that. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to get you to imagine this life so that you think, wow. So I've got an idea and I've got an expression. The hook then might be, you may already have enough money to do this, or this may be this incredible life that I've just asked you to imagine living will cost you half the amount that it would cost to live where you do right now.
Yep.
Now that's a very gentle hook, isn't it? But it's enough to just make you think, how can that be true?
Yep.
How could I have that life for half of what it cost me to live right now? And that
would it be fair to say it's this? I don't want to be too absolutist, but it's the single element of the idea, of the expression of that idea, that draws you in and keeps you there.
So it opens a gap. So in that case, it's how is that possible? How could that be possible? So can you see how there are three things going on there? So that won't be true. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to sort of figure it all out. But like, I'll give you another example, okay? Often, let's say we're talking about financial markets. There's going to be a big sudden change is going to happen in the markets. It could be a massive stock market crash. It could be the next Apple product launch. It could be whatever. Something is going to happen. When this happens, everything changes. That's your idea. Yeah. Apple are about to launch something. That actually may be powerful enough to just put as a headline. But that's what our idea is. Yeah. We then have to figure out how to express it. Often the hook in those sorts of setups is the day it's going to happen.
Yeah.
That somehow I know the day that this could happen on. So the specificity of the day. How can you possibly know that the stock market is going to crash on the 23rd of September?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Like the hook there, the date, that isn't the idea, is it? The reader isn't going away and thinking, wow, that date has really done it for me. No, the idea is about a weakness in the market, or a fragility in the market, or a big change that's coming to the market. And the hook is, well, how could you know what the day is going to be?
Yeah.
So it's the thing that draws the reader in, and it may be paid off, as would be the language I would use, somewhere, within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the sales piece, but it was enough to get me in thinking, well, what's the significance of that date? And it buys me time. So sometimes I say to junior copywriters, open that loop, and then by the time you close that loop, you want to have opened more. You have more sort of mysteries or more things I want to find out. So you're creating this dramatic tension in the same way that a murder mystery might start with a murder, but then within the first 10 minutes, you've got, oh, well, she's got a secret, hasn't she? She's not. Oh, he's having an affair. And you're opening up more loops, aren't you?
Yeah.
More narrative loops that need to be closed. And that's, you're creating more hooks for the reader to be drawn into.
I think I've got a question to ask you about how we create hooks, but I think for a copywriter listening, we talk about frameworks a lot, and I always think it's one of those things, it's like trying to get out of jail free. It's like, oh, how do you do this? Or it's like, I hate absolutism, I think, but what we're looking for is like frameworks that help clarify your thinking, because the more clearly you can think about your copy, the more effective a copywriter you will become. And this is one of those ones where it is, people ask, oh, how do you find the right ideas? How do you know you've got a right idea? What's a big idea? All this kind of stuff. Around the idea space, I think it gets a bit messy, and that's when thinking gets very unclear. And I think what this allows you to do is go, what's my idea? How am I expressing that? And what is the interesting things that I can like riff off? And that's why it's important to do that. And you might think, oh, I'll keep it all in my head and I know all that because, oh yeah, I can actually do that. No, write it down and get right. My idea is this. This is how I'm expressing it, and this is my hook, which leads me to it's a difficult question, but how do you go about figuring out a hook? Where do you draw inspiration from?
So I think there are some actual really specific things you can do. Just to kind of go back to something that I mentioned earlier, which was clickbait, which just to to kind of square off that part of the discussion. Clickbait is a hook without an idea, isn't it? Because once you click on it, you feel cheated. Oh, there's nothing else here. It's just a daft photo, or that isn't true, or that's a lie, or Piers Morgan never said that, or whatever the thing is.
He literally has said everything.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Just to cover his back.
So that you could think about that as the reverse of what we're talking about. That it draws you in, but then there's nothing. There's fine, you feel cheated. What we're talking about is our hook is the way that we entice people into the imaginative space we want them to be in, so that we can talk to them about what our idea is. So in general, as we've said in almost every episode of this we've ever done, you need to know what your idea is. You know what I'm trying to talk about, the fact that Apple are about to launch a new piece of technology that's going to change the cryptocurrency market, for instance. That's what I'm talking about. So maybe my hook is the day.
Yeah.
Whatever. Okay, so 2 things you can do to actually try and create them. The first is a general one, and the second is a more specific one. First point for it, first. Details are your friend, not your enemy, okay? So in general, when people are trying to kind of create a hook and they're maybe in the early part of their career, what they do is they just write really, really vague. It's just there's nothing to grasp. And it's like, well, this I've got so many questions about I don't even really know what you're talking about. There's no mystery here. Mystery is created by having all of the details except the one that makes everything make sense. Yeah. Okay? So let's go back to the murder mystery. Let's say it's the locked, I don't know. I'm probably going to rip off some Jonathan Creek episode from when I was a kid or something. But like, okay, there's a body found in a locked room. The curtains are drawn. There's a stain on this. You see what I mean? It's the detail that draws it all up. There's 2 locked doors. Nobody else was in the house. The window's all open from the outside. See what I mean?
Alan Davis is naked.
Yeah.
Why?
But it's the detail that makes it mysterious, isn't it? That you are missing the one piece of information. You have everything else, but none of it quite makes sense without that. So that's kind of the way to think about it, that by giving them all the rest of the detail, but withholding that, you create a very specific piece of information that the viewer, reader, prospect requires to close that loop. Now that is dramatic tension, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of people
to know what that is.
Make the mistake that thinking intrigue is created by absence and a lack of specificity, going this one weird thing, because that clickbaity style headline has become so kind of like legion in the world, but that's just a one-off kind of ignore that. It's actually the details that get you intrigued in a much more fulfilling way. You have to get there as well, going, oh, well, what is it? Why is that? If it's too weird, it's too weird. And you get the way you write weirdness in fiction always is by basing it around a very normal things. So like you can have the weirdest thing because everything else is normal. You
need the detail is what creates it. So that's the general sense. Yep. Don't go towards being just vague and removing all the information. You have to put more in. What you need to remove, if you want to this makes it sound a little bit more mechanical than it is. But for instance, can I remove the one thing that makes the whole thing make sense? Mm-hmm. So that by removing it, the reader thinks, how can that all make sense? So for instance, right, let's say I'm going to tell a story about somebody going on stage and doing a product launch, okay? Let's say it's Apple. Let's just take that because I've used that example already. Apple are going to give this product launch. Well, maybe I tell that story and I say, he's going to go on stage at this time. He's going to be wearing this. There's going to be 3,000 people in the audience. Here are the people that are going to be there. He goes up on stage. He opens his mouth. And the next sentence he says changes the world forever. Fast forward the clock 6 months. And then you start talking about the things that have changed. Amazon's gone bankrupt. Mm-hmm. Apple is worth 10 trillion or whatever. You're then into consequences and you're painting a picture of what comes next. Okay, that's the whole story, isn't it? Except what did he say? Yeah. What could he possibly have said that would lead? So I'm speculating into the future, but you can do that in the past. You can say, he said 2 words into a microphone and everything changed. Can you see how that? And then I can talk about what changed, and maybe I can bring the reader in and I can start to talk about I don't know exactly how I'm tracing this back to the customer here, but I've opened that loop because the reader is thinking, or the viewer is thinking, what did he say? What happened there? What were those 2 words? However it is you do it, by just pulling that piece of information out, but keeping all the rest of the detail, all the consequences, you've told them the whole story.
Yeah.
But they have to have that loop closed. That's just the way your mind works. It's like I say, it's why you keep watching even the crappy films. I've got to find out. There's just dramatic tension to what happens. It's like I don't know, even like a penalty shootout. It's hard to just switch it off.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know the sport, the team, the players, you don't care. There's just the drama of sport, because what happens next, you don't know. So you're drawn in. So you're just trying to create that situation where by removing that piece of information, you're going to give it to them eventually, but you're hoping that by opening that loop, by hooking the reader in that way, you give yourself enough time to introduce yourself and bring them into that world.
You do it like me, probably inherently now, but how, I'm just thinking from a very, very insanely practical point of view. You could write everything down and then how do you do it mentally, or do you construct the story? What's the process of that? So,
I think that's more innate than, I wonder if I've sort of internalized that a little bit.
I'm trying to think at the same time, because I'm it's why I've started, I've finally, without going into my personal journey, but I'm able to now run and think and get my mind active and thinking about stuff. And I'll do it then with something I'm writing and thinking, right, I've got this. And I'm repeating the things that I know. Yeah. And I'm thinking, right, what's the thing that I don't like? I won't say that yet. And I'm doing it like that. So I'm kind of going over and over and over again this thing. So, right, he's in, if you take the Apple example, he's in the room, he's wearing this, he's doing that. I'll take away that element. It doesn't necessarily need to be the secret thing everybody says, which is where I think people will be thinking, it's always that. No, it could be, he says, we're going to the moon, but it's the fact that the audience were this people. It's the audience that you might keep out of that story, or it's something, another detail, but you need to know that whole story. I guess it's coming to get everything in your mind first of all. It goes back to that kind of why you research. You do need to know what you're talking about before you start writing it.
I guess it's identifying what the key to the whole story is. Mm-hmm. What is the key? What is the thing that makes it all click, makes it all significant? Because that can actually help you with the editing process of the story too. Because we had this when we were running our training camp for everyone, and people were writing these big long story leads, 2 pages, and we were saying, you've got to cut a lot of this, it doesn't matter. It's but I've got to get to the next bit. It's no, you don't. The story's there to compel to draw the reader into that world, so you can then start talking to them about, your idea and expanding that out. The fact that what Nikola Tesla did next was, then he made a radio, and I've got to talk about the radio, because then I talk about the car, and it was actually the thing he made after the car that was important. Okay, well, that's the thing. All the rest is... So I guess it's identifying what the key is.
Yeah.
Sometimes this is called the secret of secrets, that all copywriting on some level has a secret. There was a secret to it, and once you understand that, everything else makes sense. We're sort of talking about it in the broadest way possible, and the slightly cliched way, because it's the way a lot of people will understand it or come to it. But you're trying to just figure out what that thing is that makes the whole story click. If you can't work out what that is, I think you're probably a little bit fuzzy on what your idea is. And it does get easier. It gets easier the more you do it.
When you started to express the idea of an idea versus a hook and all this kind of stuff, what ultimately are you looking for people to do? What do you think the benefit of doing that is?
Rephrase that. I don't understand what you're asking me.
In the sense of, I'm trying to get to why should people do, why should they think about what their hook is versus what their idea is?
Well, I see it as quite mechanical, so I just think there are elements that make up most good sales pieces. Just as I think I think the analogies with blockbuster style fiction, and that it's almost like a genre piece of writing. There is a structure, there's an underlying way it all works, and you can play around with that, but you really need to know how it all works to begin with. That's not true of all great films, but it's true of all great whodunits. So, for instance, I'm just going to keep using the metaphor of the comparison to whodunits in fiction. If you read Agatha Christie, there's a way that those stories work. There's often a twist on it. Right, spoiler alert if you've never read any Agatha Christie. There's one of her novels, I'm not going to tell you which one it is, where it turns out the person who did it is the narrator. Mm-hmm. Really, actually, I think that was the first one she ever wrote. Or the Murder on the Orient Express, they all did it, didn't they? That's how that...
Yeah.
So, that's the twist on the format. I know that I've sort of drifted into just talking about it, but that's the way I think about it, which is I think as a copywriter, we're almost like a genre writer. Therefore, we need to understand how the genre works, how it all fits together. And if we start thinking about it like that, we can start making little twists on it. We can start figuring out that, maybe our hook here is so strong that it becomes our headline or whatever. But I think if you don't have that understanding, it's like turning up, you're in a writer's room to write the next, 3-part BBC whodunit series and just not having any concept of how it all works together. Yeah. I just don't, you would never do that, would you?
I guess the point I'm getting you to pull out of you is the idea that it works. That's why you do it. But also it's because doing that understanding stuff, so many copywriters we find and people know it, and you get it yourself, I think, if you're honest and look inside and go, I kind of do that in my head rather than bothering to figure it out. It will get you down the line. You will get into a point where you go, oh shit, I've lost my way. I don't know what I'm quite doing. So it pays to think about these frameworks and think, right, okay, I'll do an exercise now where I'll sit down and go, what is my idea? How do I express that idea? What's 5 different hooks that I can use, because it just allows you to have that clarity of thinking. And we know by doing that, all of these things, you can be as creative as you want around that, but all of a successful has a common thing, a successful whodunit, a successful, that even the most experimental ones will still understand the basic principles of, and in this case, a sales letter will have an idea, the expression of that idea, and a hook. So it pays to sit down and figure it out.
You start to see it again. Again, I'm going to use comparison to fiction and to TV. How often do you see the motif of the locked room? What's inside the rattling door? Well, what's in there? The box, the black box. What's inside the box? Or maybe it's an editing technique where the story's running along and then all of a sudden you just don't hear what somebody says. You see that in you see that in spy thrillers all the time, where it's the sound drops out and you see them talking and their reaction, and you're just thinking, well, what just got said? There's a series of, and you probably think of more as you keep going, but there's motifs that appear again and again and again in drama, and it's because they're open loops. It's because you want to know what's inside the locked door, or when they all glance at the cellar, and it's well, what's down there then? Do you see what I mean? It's there are certain imaginative spaces that we fill in our minds. Now, I'm not saying that that's how it works in all copywriting, but I do think once you start analysing it like that and starting to look at other people's copy and say, well, what was the hook there? What drew me in? What was the thing? You start to see, that's how it was done there. That's how it was done there. That's how it was done there. It's often, I'll give you another example, a really, really successful sales letter from over a decade ago now, that was end of America. It was all about the dollar losing its reserve currency status. That was the idea. The expression, the headline thing, was almost like a challenge. This is controversial. Don't watch it if you're squeamish, or whatever it said. The hook was actually, in the initial phase, there was a strange day. The most important day in America for 50 years is coming, or something like that. It was the day that was the hook. Well, what's going to happen on that day? Well, it turned out that was the day that the dollar loses its reserve currency status. So the hook connected into the idea, but they're not the same thing, are they? That like the idea was broader and more important. The hook was like, it was the thing that got you there.
Yep.
So it opened that loop and it hooked you in. And I mean, there is a case for literally just going through, you know, we could do this ourselves in a future episode where we get 20 different promotions and we go on about them for 4 hours, the longest episode of The Fix that we've ever done, and just run through them all. But you'd start to see patterns of, look, that's how that hook works. That's how that hook works. But start to figure it out in other people's work, start to analyze it, and you'll start to see that there's, like anything, there's a certain set of ways.
That's something I presume you'd advise people to do. It's take that framework and go to other promos and go, right, what is the idea and what is the hook, and see the difference.
Yeah, and we've just finished recording our Q&A session. One of the questions was about writing out sales letters by hand. And you know, like I said, I think you're better off writing an analysis, taking apart a sales letter than just writing it out, because I think it forces you to think about what's going on underneath the writing. But yeah, you could definitely go through sales letters and try to figure out what is the hook here. And I guarantee you that they will all have one. They will all have something that forced you to keep reading. Yeah. Forced you, whether it was the identity of the person writing to you, the identity of the person that's the enemy, the dastardly, the thing that Joe Biden's going to do next, or whatever. There's always something that's like, oh, I need to square.
He doesn't know what the next thing he's doing is.
I don't think he knows much, but there's always something. There's always that gap that needs closing.
I'll finish it on a slightly negative angle, but I'm thinking in terms of, at the moment, it's always whatever is in my head, but we're watching Homeland. We picked up the final series kind of thing. And we're watching that. It's quite an involved program. It's, if you've not come across it, it's CIA kind of.
I've watched the first series.
Yeah, there's a general consensus. It was great, then it went rubbish, and then it kind of got good again. And it's good at the end. And I find it quite interesting. It's like a John le Carré novel when he's not writing anymore. So, but I'm watching Ruth, and she kind of watching in a distracted way almost, I would say. And I'd say there's a method to my madness in this kind of going off on a tangent, is that I'm watching it and I'm going, and there's open loops all the time. They're going, all right, why is she doing that? Why is he doing that? And Ruth's kind of watching it slightly distracted, maybe like just doing something online or whatever. And then she'll go, why has that happened? And I'm like, I'm watching it and now I have to explain it or whatever. But I'm watching, and I am always watching stuff with kind of copy, with my analyst mind in thing to say, how are they doing that? And I'm interested by that program. I think it's worth watching as an exercise, as a copywriting exercise. Try and watch it at work if you're allowed, and say, I'm figuring this out. But that it has got to the point where I feel like that writer's room we're opening too many loops.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting thing. Yeah. And I think where you can see this in copywriters as well, where it's going, right, I turn up with my bag of hooks and I go, right, I've got this secret date, I've got this secret thing, I've got this secret thing. I'm ready to write my letter because all these secrets. And it's like, no. You actually have to be a little bit more reserved, because when I watch and Ruth goes, sorry, what was that? Because she's distracted, as most readers of copy are. They've got other stuff going on. If you open too many, they're going to lose the flow. You have to make sure that hook is probably one. Others will open and move, but be very aware that, and this, it comes back to, why would you sit there and write out what your idea is, what your hook is? Because once you understand it, you can then keep track of how many, because if you go too, like, one of the biggest problems is that people will open too many interesting, and think, back to your earlier point of like abstract, like intrigue being just vagueness, is like, if you just go, oh, there's this thing that's doing this thing, that's doing this thing, that's not right.
So there's two sets of risks at either end of the spectrum, right? So what you're talking about there, too many loops, that's work for your reader then, right? That's really what you're talking about dramatically, that, oh God, there's so much mystery here. And Lost was the classic example of that. nobody could work. Where did the polar bear go?
Yeah.
Why was he? What was that in it? It's like unresolved. That's an unresolved loop.
Yeah, which you can do as
but
an
that's why
effective
it
thing.
annoys so many people because what they wanted. Lost is a great example of this because most people watched some of that, certainly of my generation, because it was on when I was at university. But the reason that irritated people in the end was because there was loops opened that were never closed, and it still annoys people to this day. It annoys me that I invested time in something that wasn't resolved in a satisfying way in my own mind, and it bothers me. It's because my mind abhors a vacuum. That loop needed closing. So that's a problem. If you do too many, like you said there, you're getting away from what the point is, which is it's a sales letter. You're trying to open loops to bring somebody into your world to talk to them about this more abstract product, so that it's a device for doing that. You don't want it to become work and too much of a challenge. That's at one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is you often get a piece of copy without a hook, without an open loop. The criticism that is often levelled at that is like, you've kind of just told me everything about it within the first sort of page, like it's a pitch for a penny shares newsletter or whatever. And it's like, well, by the end of page 2, you've kind of told me it's penny shares and it's a newsletter, and it's like, right, so I can sort of make a decision now whether or not I want to buy this or not. But I'm not sold yet because it's an abstract product. You haven't spent enough time getting into the benefits. So that was just too plain and too straightforward. And therefore, because there was no open loop, all right, I can sort of just take it or leave it. I know what it's about. That doesn't work either, I don't think, because it just asks the reader to just be sold straight away. So it's using that. When it works well, it's bringing them into your world to give you enough time to introduce yourself, to establish your credibility, to start to show them the benefits, to start to convince them, to start to make your case. It gets them into that space. So there are risks at both sides. Maybe we do a workshop on this because it is complicated. But so the underlying points are, I would say, all great copy of a certain type and of a certain length has a hook or an open loop. You need to figure out what it is and how it differs to your idea and your expression. And once you start to figure out that sort of triumvirate of things, that once you've got those things locked in, I'm always fairly happy that, like, right, I know how this is all going to work, and I feel fairly happy about writing. But I am interested to know, in what way do you think a sort of 30-second advert on the TV?
Well, I think because for me, this really comes down. I'm thinking of fiction. I think there's so much. It's quite a broad and abstract idea, but I think
it's dramatic tension.
Yeah, and I think it's useful to understand. And most people will not discuss this, which is what we're here to do. Like, do the stuff that people go, oh, 6 ways to write better copy. It's like, just get lost. Like, this is the stuff that you need to think about.
You don't want to do 6 ways to write better copy.
No, on your head,
7.
naked, in the bath. No, but and people don't do this because it's too hard and it's too like, I don't really think.
It runs the risk of sounding a bit wishy-washy, a bit complex.
Philosophical and what have you, which is apparently not a good thing these days because we just want absolutes, that is thing, whatever. But we go on about so much of the stuff you do before you write. This is a thing where you sit there and do before you write. Like, this is why you sit there and go, right, what's my idea? What's my expression? How am I going to hook people in there? I would say that is a universal thing, that even if you're writing a blog post, so let's reduce it from a sales letter of 10,000 words to a blog post of 1,000 words, you still need to know, what am I writing about? How am I going to get people to read to the end of that? What's the hook that I'm going to get me on that? Take it down to a 30-word Facebook ad. Like, what is the idea? What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, you should do X, Y, and Z, but like, how am I going to hook people in with a little thing? And then if you've just got literally a poster on the wall, you will still have, what is the idea? How am I expressing that? And what is I think you do open slight loops with even an image ad on the street thing. Certainly with like a 30-second ad or like a TV spot or anything like that. You will always have this, and write in and tell me if you can think of an example. I don't think there is a piece of copy, a format of copy, from a Facebook SEO ad to a long copy sales letter, where you would not benefit from sitting down, literally writing, here is my idea, here is how I will express that idea, and here is a hook.
Yep.
If you do that, what you can then do is bring back that question of how do you get ideas, where do you get ideas from, all this kind of stuff. What you're really saying is, how do I hook people in?
Yeah.
Now you know what your idea is, so you don't need, you've got your idea because your boss has told you that, or the marketing department says, we need to do this idea because this is how we're going to make our money, and that's our product. What you're really asking for is, how do I come up with different hooks? And once you've got that clearly laid down, you can go, all right, how do I hook people in? Right, I can hook them in on the date, I can hook them in on this, I can hook them in this detail, this detail, this detail. So that works for any piece of advertising.
Well, one final point I'll make, which I probably should, well, we could do a whole episode on this as well, but public speaking is another great technique you can use. Let's say you're giving a business presentation, and I've given this advice. One of my friends runs his own business. It's going really well. We would be out on our bikes sometimes, and we'd be talking about pitches he's going to do or whatever. And he watches The Fix. In fact, we've reviewed some of his copy, but I won't tell you who it was because, well, maybe you'll find out in a future episode. But I remember saying to him, like, let's say you're doing the agenda slide of a business presentation. Why would you just tell them everything you are going to tell them? Why would you not create a bit of a sense of mystery? Not in a daft copy way, but like, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this. And don't let me forget, the last thing I'm going to talk about, I want to talk about the thing that I reckon can make this business more money than anything else this year. Don't let me forget to talk about that, by the way. Just some, like, depending on who you're pitching to, but why would you not make your agenda, the laying out of what you're going to talk about, have some sense of drama, some sense of, because you can guarantee that's going to make them think, well, I wonder what that is. Yeah. I wonder what that thing is that he's going to say. Let's say you were giving a best man speech. If you say at the start, everyone, at the end of this talk, I'm going to tell you how you can all get a free pint, but you've got to be here at 10 o'clock. I'll tell you how later. Whatever. Yeah. I don't know, maybe you're going to buy them all a pint at 10 o'clock. Maybe, I don't know what the thing is, and it shouldn't just be made up, but why not throw something like that in at the start? Because what it does is it creates an open loop, it creates a bit of drama, and it means your audience is more engaged in what you're going to talk about. I think particularly when you're pitching, but if you're doing a pitch to a new customer, why not lay out a few little very, very subtle, gentle hooks? Even if it was, we're going to talk about, the UK's position as regards to wind energy, but I'm going to tell you why I think a lot of people have got this really wrong. It could be something really simple like that. So you just think, I wonder what that is. I wonder what his point about that is going to be. It doesn't have to be some, I'm going to tell you about a murder mystery, but just why not structure your talk around things where you say, I'm going to tell you about this, and it creates the question in the reader's mind of, oh, well, that sounds interesting. I wonder what that is. Because it's going to draw people in, and it's going to make your talk a lot more compelling. And frankly, most people don't do that, so you're going to be up there in terms of public speaking and in terms of the drama.
Well, it works with everything, doesn't it? I think people, I was trying to think of a twee saying of like the arrogance of nonchalance or something, but it's people just think, oh no, I've got to do, it's like there will almost never be a time when making something more engaging is not better. And
by the way, in the world of business presentations and then all that sort of, the pushback you usually get, if you're copywriter, people ask you for your advice about stuff like that. You tell them how you would do it. They say, "Oh, that's just not how it's done in our industry." You say, "Oh, we'll just do it like then." Yeah. Is it great? Is it brilliant already? Yeah. Does everybody love every presentation that they get, or are they really bored and go on their phone? Because if that's what happens, you should do it differently. You should be brave. You should try deploying some of these techniques. Figure out how they might work for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do it in a subtle way. It doesn't have to be the day that America's financial system will collapse. It might be, I just saw something on page 9 of the Daily Mirror, but I reckon everybody in this room needs to see it. Just something daft like that. I'm just making these things up. But like, would you, as somebody in the room, just in the back of your mind, you just then think, I wonder what that thing was.
Yeah. And I realise now, of course, to bring this episode to its conclusion, that we should have started at the beginning with an open loop that we would have paid off at the end. And that would have been much more entertaining for you, waiting to find out what that was. Unfortunately, because we are so damn authentic and just follow it and riff on things, we don't actually do this. But we will maybe one day do it.
I also, as we said, well, we didn't say at the start, but before we came on air, I've just come back from my brother's stag do, and I'm operating at about 70%. So that 30% is maybe where the hook would have come from.
I've also realised that we're going from this recording to meet 3 other copywriters, and even just organising that today, we got emails this morning going, oh, what was the time again? Where are we going again? What's going on? I just thought,
paying for this?
I thought, my creative people, we are not good at organising things, but that is unfortunately, I have to bear with it. But I hope you found this interesting. This is a very, as I say, it's a very kind of abstract, kind of bit more philosophical kind of thing. But what I hope that it gives you is that inspiration almost to sit there with a framework and go, right, okay, maybe, just maybe for the next thing you write, sit there and go, right, what is my idea here? How am I expressing it? And what is my hook? If you do that exercise, do it, write it down, sit there and do it yourself this time. If you do that, you will slowly get that clarity of thinking inherently, and it will help you enormously, and it will help you separate those ideas. Also, as a little thing in the comments, if you want to, I'd love to know. I'm obsessed with looking at things, I say, watching Homeland, and Nick's talking about Agatha Christie novels. Where do you see things, hooks that have kept you in personally? And it can be anything, a book, a film, anything where you thought, oh, I just need to find out what that is. Let us know, because I find it really interesting to kind of see examples of that in the real world. So comment below. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will be back again soon. And there we have it. We hope you got something valuable out of today's episode of The Fix.
Maybe it sparked an idea or two for your next writing project. Maybe it triggered a new headline, opening line, or story to tell your reader.
Maybe it inspired you to scrap what you have and start over. Or maybe it made you want to submit your current work in progress for a little constructive feedback. If that is the case, send your copy to us at feedback@thefixcopywriting.com. Or if you don't want us to review a specific piece of writing, send us a problem you're trying to solve,
or a challenge you want input on, and we'll do our best to help.
And remember, if you like The Fix, please do share it with other writers, business owners, and marketers.